Below the Alps, for more than 100,000 years, there lived many culturally very diverse communities. In the late 6th century, Slavs moved to the area of the current Slovenia from the north and east. They brought with them their own linguistic identity, in which today's Slovene is rooted. They lived mainly from arable farming and animal husbandry, growing various cereal crops and raising cattle, sheep, goats and pigs. They used a rotational system of farming. A piece of land would be ploughed, sown and reaped for 1 or 2 years and then left fallow for a number of years. Where fields were already established, a two-field system was used. Each year, alternately, only half of the fields would be ploughed and sowed with winter wheat, while the other half was allowed to lie fallow. In addition to turning the soil, burning was used. Trees would be cut down, and when the wood was dry, it would be burnt and the ash evenly scattered. The land fertilized in this way was then dug over and sown. For 2 years it would be very fertile, and then it was allowed to become overgrown again. Craft activities included the production of metal objects, linen and pottery. The Slavs lived in tribal and free village communities that fell apart upon the introduction of the feudal system in the 9th century. Their settlements were made up of simple one-space dwellings. In the winter, in their partially buried houses, they warmed themselves beside stoves or open hearths on the ground. The diet mainly consisted of different kinds of porridge, especially millet, but they often suffered from lack of food. There was a custom of enthroning. An assembly of freemen symbolically surrendered the throne to a selected prince, thus confirming his authority. Their beliefs were gradually suppressed by the spread of Christianity, which began in the 8th century. Revolts against it soon waned. They spoke an Old Slavonic dialect from which, in the first centuries of the 2nd millennium, Slovene was formed. Let us listen to their speech as it is recorded in the Freising manuscripts.
Потому ostanem sich mrskih del.
So let us abandon these abhorrent acts,
Eže son dela sotonina.
as they are Satan's work,
Eže trebon tvorim.
making sacrifices,
Bratra oklevetam.
slandering one's brother,
Eže tatva.
theft,
Eže razboj.
murder,
Eže polti ugojenje.
carnality,
Eže roti koichže ne pasem.
breaking oaths,
Nujen predstompam.
rather than respecting them,
Eže nenavist.
showing hatred.
Niđe teh del mržene pred Božjima očima.
All of these are abhorrent in God's eyes. From the 9th century onwards, the Alpine Slavs become part of the Western world. Politically, economically and culturally, they contribute to its formation. a feudal social order is established. On one-family farms, there live vassals who are subject to the feudal lord. By the 11th century, this process is complete. The introduction of a three-field crop rotation system becomes an important part of the way of life. The village's land was divided into three, with each farmer holding a share in each part. One would be sown with spring wheat, one with winter wheat, while on the third, that lay fallow, animals would graze. Each year the use of land would be rotated, so that by the fourth year it would come back to the starting point. This kind of three-year rotation was used until the end of the 18th century. All the farms in a settlement had to cooperate, which bound the community tightly together. The cattle, sheep, goats and pigs would be small and poorly fed. The animals would graze as long as grazing was available. Then, before the winter, some were slaughtered, while the rest were inadequately foddered in temporary, half-open stables. Between the 12th and 15th centuries, the appearance of the cultivated landscape changed. In settled areas where there had previously been small settlements, castles were now built in naturally or artificially defended locations, the fortified dwelling of the feudal lord or his administrators. In low-lying areas, in favourable legal, ecclesiastical, property, defence and transport conditions, there were larger non-farming settlements. Market towns and walled towns with different freedoms and rights, including self-administration. Town inhabitants were personally free, but special rights were held only by the limited few. In the towns, the main way of earning a living was through trade and crafts. Craftsmen produced quality products and developed extremely important knowledge, which over centuries formed the basis of manufacturing and industry. Particularly common were crafts related to food, such as bakers and butchers, clothing, such as leatherworkers, shoemakers, farriers, weavers and tailors, and metalworking, such as blacksmiths, nail makers and needle makers. In addition to these, people were involved in a range of other crafts, from carpenters to chest makers, from wood turners to cutwrights, from potters to barrel makers, and from saddlers to stone masons and builders. The gains made during the late Middle Ages among the rich nobles and bourgeoisie broadened and developed. In the homes of these classes, comfort became valued. Even in some farmhouses, they began to install stoves that, in winter, warmed rooms without making them smoky, and the rooms already held different furniture. The kitchens, however, were still black from soot and smoke. And the majority of the population still lived in such a smoky atmosphere. In the main dwelling space was either a stove without a chimney or an open hearth. The main furniture would be a bench and a chest, while the main utensils would be ceramic and wooden dishes. Even though the extent of the farming population's trade and craft activities grew, the position of the majority worsened. Tributes increased, and the authorities encroached upon peasant rights. The consequence of a series of bad harvests were shortages and hunger. The peasantry were aware of the reasons for their misery and rebelled. There were more than 150 uprisings, many of them on a mass scale. The largest were the Corinthian, the Pan-Slovene, the Slovene-Croatian, one scattered across Styria, Lower Carniola, Upper Carniola and Inner Carniola, and the Tolmin uprising. In 1550 there appears the first Slovene book, Catechism. In the introduction, Primož Trubar writes, "To all Slovenes, peace, mercy, and the true recognition of God through Jesus Christ." The horizons and knowledge of the population widen. Already in the late Middle Ages, and even more in the early modern period, people travel more, going on pilgrimages and to fairs. Different forms of transport develop. Ways of making a living and other aspects of life and culture constantly change. In the mid-18th century, the way of life we have seen changes universally and dramatically due to the agrarian technical revolution. Another revolution, the industrial one, fundamentally changes the life of all the people from the mid-19th century onwards.